Hmm. Hmm. Hey guys, how's it going? Earlier today, AutoChess dropped their new patch notes for the patch coming July 24th. This patch is actually a really big patch, so I'll only be going over the more important additions to this patch. The largest addition to this patch is the addition of a new piece, Shining Archer. So this is a 2-cost Feathered Hunter, whose ults actually affects other boards based on whether you're 1st or 8th or wherever in between in the health rankings in that game. I'll be talking about how this impacts the meta later. Another thing they're doing is adding the items inheritance system, which means that every time a chess player is eliminated, their items can be randomly distributed among surviving players. They're deleting Ring of Regen, and they're also changing the one item that Ring of Regen combined it into, the Anti-Maga Cloak, into just Ring of Life and Resistant Cloak, and otherwise remains basically unchanged. Also, what they're doing is they're fixing the Frantic Masks bug, which is apparently a bug, but I thought it was a feature, where it actually silences items attached to the same unit that Frantic Mask is attached to. Before this patch, if you had Frantic Mask on a unit, and you also had another active item, like Claw Wand or Pulse Staff, the unit actually wouldn't be able to activate the item, and I had assumed that this was a property of Frantic Mask, but apparently it's a bug, so now you know, and now you know that you can add Frantic Mask with an item, which is actually a pretty big change. All right, so now to the actual balancing of the races and classes. So the weak synergy that this week that they're going to be buffing is Warlock. So what they're doing is they're changing the synergy thresholds from 3 and 6 Warlocks to 2, 4, and 6 Warlocks. Instead of doing 20 and then 25% lifesteal, instead now it does 10, 20, and then 30% lifesteal. So before, if you had 6 Warlocks, you would have 45% lifesteal on your spells, and now with 6 Warlocks, you're going to be getting 60% lifesteal on all your skills. This overall is a buff to 6 Warlocks, but I'll go into my issues with this balance change later. Another thing they're doing is they're buffing Venomancer, increasing the HP regen. They're also buffing Shadow Devil, decreasing the cooldown of its skill. They're buffing Cure Mage with an AI buff. They're buffing Goblin Synergy to increase the armor, and they're also decreasing Knight damage reduction from 30% to 25%. Now, I believe that this change is actually a change to the probability that the shield is getting popped. So right now I believe that each shield has the same armor and magic resist shield, but with different probabilities that the shield is being popped. So at 2 Knight Synergy, it's a 25% chance. 4 Knight Synergy, you have a 30% chance, and 6 Knight Synergy is a 30% chance, which is now being changed to 25% chance. So this change only slightly reduces the chance of the shields being popped at 6 Knight Synergy specifically. Anyways, Devastator is getting a 100 damage nerf to its skill at each rank. They're increasing Strange Egg's draw rate, and they're also changing the way that Claw Wand activates its ability. So now we can get into how these changes are going to be affecting the meta. So the first thing I'm going to actually talk about is the addition of Shining Archer. So Shining Archer actually introduces a new mechanic, which is actually quite interesting. The mechanic is cross-board skills. What it does is once it reaches full mana, it uses its skill, which launches to the enemy's board that is fighting your pieces. The damage and stun duration of the skill actually scales based on the difference of ranking between the players at the beginning of the round. So that means that if you're at 8th place in terms of health out of the players, and the person you're facing is first on the rankings, then it's going to be doing its maximum damage, whereas it'll be doing the minimum damage when you're at first place and your opponent is at last place. So what are the effects of Shining Archer that are going to be introduced in this new patch? First of all, it's important to note that this is a Feathered Hunter, which is the same as Wind Ranger. The way that I view this piece is that it has 2 main consequences. First, it makes loose streaking into Feathered stronger due to its skill scaling on how poorly you're doing at the current moment. The second thing it does is it allows people to get 6 Hunter bonus way earlier in the game. you can get this 6 Hunter bonus at level 6 because you can get Siren early, but you can't get Tsunami Stalker until at least level 8. So how do I think that this is going to affect the meta? Do I think that Feathered Hunter is going to be the new best build? No. Now why is it? The thing with Feathered Hunter is that other hunters counter Feathered. So that means that if you're building Feathered Hunter and someone else is building 6 Hunter and a different frontline like Druid or Knights or Warrior, they're going to be able to out damage you. Another thing to note is that Feathers are relatively understated. So that means that if you're fighting with 2-star Feathered units and your opponents are fighting with 2-star, say, Warrior units, they're going to be outstatting you and doing better against your units one-on-one as well. So will Shining Archer make 6 Hunter better? Yes, it is a resounding yes. This is actually indirectly a nerf to Feathered and Knights because of how strong Hunters are into them. But I'll actually talk about Knights a little bit more in the upcoming notes. So now I'm going to be talking about the Warlock changes. Huh? So basically the way that this is working is it's a buff to 2 Warlock synergy, it's a nerf to 3 Warlock synergy, and then it's a buff to 4 Warlock synergy. How does this affect the meta? First of all, what are the compositions that most utilize the Warlock class? There is Knight's Glacier Warlock, there is Mech Goblin Warlock, and there's Divinity Mage Warlock. There's also a Beast Warrior Warlock that is floating around that will probably get better from this, but I'll get into that. So let's go through that one by one. Knight's Glacier Warlock. How does this affect Knight's Glacier Warlock? First of all, this change actually makes Knight's Glacier Warlock more flexible. Before, the way that Knight's Glacier Warlock worked was that it power spiked at level 7 once you hit 4 Glacier. It had a very small power spike once you hit level 8 with the Exorcist bonus, and then it had a large power spike at level 9 once you hit 3 Warlock, 2 Exorcists, 4 Knights, and 4 Glacier. So how does this change affect that? Basically, it moves the power spike from level 9 and it splits it between level 8 and level 10. But it leaves open another different level 9 power spike involving Storm Shaman instead. So how does this affect the comp? At level 7, you power spike with 4 Glacier and 4 Knights. You level to level 8 and you get 2 Exorcists, 2 Warlock, and 4 Knights and 4 Glacier. This means that Knight's Glacier Warlock actually power spikes a little bit earlier but a little bit weaker than before, getting only 10% lifesteal instead of 20% lifesteal. This is actually a pretty decent change because 10% lifesteal isn't actually very much. So only time will have to tell how big of a synergy bonus this actually is. So now you have 4 options about what you can do with Knight's Glacier Warlock, giving you so much flexibility that you can actually shift it around once you hit different level marks. At level 8, you can stay at level 8 and just make all your pieces really high quality. At level 9, you can add in Storm Shaman, and at level 10, you can choose between having 2 Warlocks and 6 Knights, or hitting 4 Warlocks. So do I think this balance patch for Warlocks makes Knight's Glacier Warlock weaker? It's very hard to tell. They're a little bit stronger at level 8, but actually probably a little bit weaker at level 9. It's always great to have Storm Shaman in it, but it's hard to tell the difference that a Storm Shaman is compared to having 10% more lifesteal added to attacks and skills. Alright, enough about Knight's Glacier Warlock. Let's just talk about Warlock a little bit more generally. So a lot of builds that ran Warlock hit the 3 Warlock synergy pretty comfortably. Obviously because that was the initial threshold. Being able to hit 2 Warlock synergy a little bit earlier, at 1 level earlier, is actually really good, but the fact that they have the lifesteal from the synergy bonus makes me think that people actually have to start going for Warlock instead to make up for this. So that means that most builds that ran Warlock will probably have to level up another time just to fit in a 4th Warlock, but most builds can't afford to level up another time, so my thought with this balance change is that it might actually end up being a nerf to Warlock. What I expect is that next patch, they're going to be buffing Warlock to be 15% at 2 synergy, or they're going to revert the changes. Once you take into account the Venomancer changes, the Goblin changes, and the Devastator changes, you can see that they're probably pushing for Goblin Mech Warlock to be a little bit more of a thing, because they can actually hit the 4 Warlock bonus at level 10. Mech Goblin Warlock usually likes to go to level 10 or level 9 at least, because they have so many legendaries in their build with Devastator, Helicopter, and Dark Spirit in their build, as well as Venomancer being a 4-cost unit, makes it so that they want to be higher level to get more Venomancers. I think after this patch, Mech Goblin Warlock is probably going to be slightly stronger, and we'll be seeing a lot more representation in the builds. Now I'm going to quickly hit on the Shadow Devil changes. The Shadow Devil changes is actually quite interesting because now it makes it possible for Shadow Devil to be using his ult twice in any given fight, and it makes it so that running double Demon with a Divinity comp might actually be a thing, with Phantom Queen and Shadow Devil having very low cooldowns, making it so that they might actually be able to run double Demon without sucking. I think the Ogre Mage AI buff is mostly inconsequential. So I'm also going to hit quickly on the Knights changes. This nerf is actually really, really small, like very, very small, and it's also basically just another nerf to Dragon Knights. Dragon Knights was basically the only Knights comp that ran the 6 Knights, so I don't think that this nerf will do very much to the Knights, much like the Dragon Knight nerf from last patch. So now I'm going to talk about Claw Wand changes and the other item mechanic changes that were being introduced to this patch. So the way Claw Wand works now is it apparently activates when the enemy piece hits full mana. I originally read this as the equipped piece has full mana, which would make it very, very bad. But the fact that this activates when the enemy piece first hits full mana probably is a pretty big buff. It means that your pieces won't be stalled at the beginning of the game. The Claw Wand is going to have more use during the fight, because before it would probably only have a real active duration for about 5 to 6 seconds at any given fight. This change also makes sense because it's basically an AI buff. Normally AIs activate items at the beginning of every round no matter what, but it does make a little bit more sense for any piece to activate this once an enemy piece has full mana. I'm pretty sure you can also cast items during attack animations, so it doesn't have the same issue as skills. A lot of the time pieces can get locked into their auto attack animations and won't actually be able to activate their skills once they reach their full mana. But since this is an item effect, it probably will activate 100% of the time once the enemy pieces are at full mana, unless they're silenced through a human buff or something like that. The other important item changes are Ring of Regen is getting removed, which is quite nice, and the item redistribution mechanic. I personally don't like this mechanic unless it splits all the enemy items into its component parts. So if an enemy has, say, a refresher orb, if that full orb of refresh can randomly go to any one player, it is going to make that player win the game. So I hope that it splits it into the component parts, or it just removes golden items from the redistribution pool, because if they don't, they could very easily break the game. Lastly, the Frantic Mask changes is just a nice quality of life change to Frantic Mask. Usually you're not putting a whole lot of activatable items onto pieces that you're silenced, but you could definitely see a Claw Wand added with a Frantic Mask. So how do I think that this is going to be affecting the actual overall meta? 6 Hunters is going to be much stronger, since they don't actually have to hit level 8 to get the 600 buff, and the 600 buff is actually very strong. Glacier Knight Warlock is going to be more flexible, but probably going to be weaker due to the Warlock changes and the Hunter buffs. Feathered, likewise, is going to be much weaker due to Hunters being a lot more prevalent in the meta, and the 600 bonus being so strong against Feathered. Goblin Mech Warlock will be slightly better, mostly unchanged. The buff to the Goblin buff at 6 is actually pretty strong, but it was already really strong once it hit the 6 Goblin and 4 Mech mark anyways, so it'll be much stronger level 10, but until then, it's going to be the same strength. Beast Warriors is going to stay at its current strength, and it might actually increase in relevancy due to how strong it is early game, so it'll actually probably be able to compete with Hunters early game. And Beast Warrior is really strong right now, so chances are the meta is going to look like 6 Hunters and Beast Warriors. Mages might be a little bit stronger due to less Knights. It does pretty decently against Hunters, and it does okay against warriors, so you might see 6 Mage rising a little bit in their relevancy. Divinity Mage Warlock is mostly the same, but they might be able to run Phantom Queen and Shadow Devil for an early Warlock buff or an early Assassin buff because of how strong both of them are individually, making it an actual viable pick for Divinity Mage Warlock. We'll see how that pans out. But yeah, so those are my thoughts on the meta and how it's going to be changing over this next week or so. Please let me know any thoughts that you have, because, you know, I'm always open to anyone else's thoughts. But until then, thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you guys in the next one.